Welcome to the deep dive. We're going deep into some fascinating stuff. Reflections on spirituality and self-cultivation, drawing on ancient traditions like Taoism and Kabbalah.
Yeah.
You've given us quite a mix of thoughts and observations here. So we're here to kind of help you make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's like you've thrown all these puzzle pieces on the table, and we're going to try to put them together into a clearer picture.
Exactly. And it seems like the central question you're grappling with is how we navigate personal and spiritual growth, especially in this, this age of information overload and misinformation.
This magical age, as you called it.
Right, exactly. And one of the things that really jumped out at me in your notes was the comparison between Taoism and Kabbalah, particularly the idea of immortality in both traditions.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that both traditions seem to view immortality not just as like living forever physically, but as a deeper understanding of the universe and how it works. It's about aligning yourself with that natural order, the Tao, as the Taoists say.
So it's less about, trying to live forever and more about tapping into something timeless within ourselves and the universe.
Exactly. And that's where self-cultivation comes in. Both Taoism and Kabbalah emphasize the process, the journey of refining ourselves rather than seeking quick fixes or shortcuts.
And I think that's where your concern about this magical age comes in. You seem wary of the way spirituality is often presented today. Lots of self-proclaimed gurus and a focus on instant gratification.
Right. It's like that analogy you use in your notes about a banquet. People are invited to this huge feast without having prepared themselves properly.
They haven't gone through the necessary purification or inner work to really benefit from the spiritual food that's being offered.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a house on a shaky foundation. If we haven't done that inner work, all the spiritual teachings and practices in the world won't lead to real lasting transformation.
So it's about more than just accumulating knowledge or having cool mystical experiences. It's about a fundamental shift in our being and who we are at our core.
Right, and that's why discernment is so crucial, especially in this day and age, with so much information coming at us from all directions.
You even included a, quote, warning against those who claim to have all the answers. It's a reminder to be cautious of anyone offering easy solutions or claiming to have some kind of special access to divine knowledge.
Yeah, because the real path, as both Taoism and Kabbalah suggest, is about inner transformation, not just accumulating knowledge or seeking external validation. It's about aligning our actions with a deep understanding of right and wrong, which is a process that takes time and dedication.
And speaking of action, you also highlighted a critique of practices like tarot and channeling, suggesting they can be misleading without the proper foundation.
The image used was comparing it to a cup of muddy water. No matter how beautiful or elaborate the cup is, the water itself is still impure. The real work lies in purifying the water, which in this analogy represents our own inner being. Practices like tarot can be helpful tools, but they're not substitutes for that inner work of self-cultivation.
Okay, I see the connection here. We need to be discerning about the information we take in. We need to cultivate our inner selves and ensure our actions reflect our understanding. But how does this all tie back to Taoism and Kabbalah? Especially that concept of yin and yang you mentioned.
Well, the source connects yin and yang, that interplay of light and dark, active and passive energies, to the process of spiritual growth. In Taoism, achieving that state of immortality involves transforming the yin aspects within us into yang, becoming a being of pure light.
So it's not just about acquiring knowledge or having mystical experiences. It's about a fundamental shift in our very being.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the critique of quick fixes and shortcuts in spiritual seeking. True transformation, like healing from a serious illness, takes time, effort, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Yeah, those shortcuts can be so tempting, especially in today's world, right? Like everything's got to be fast and easy.
Instant gratification.
Yeah, exactly. But, the source reminds us that true growth is more like a slow and deliberate process. Like tending a garden, you can't rush the growth of a plant. Trying to force it could actually do more harm than good.
That's a great analogy, and just like a good gardener needs to understand the specific needs of each plant. We need to understand the unique terrain of our own inner landscape.
Which brings us back to discernment, being able to sort through all the information out there and find what really resonates with us, what truly feels right.
Right, and the source really emphasizes that point, especially in the context of this magical age we talked about. There's this concern that all this information out there, coupled with the rise of so many self-proclaimed spiritual authorities, could lead people astray.
It's like we're at this huge spiritual buffet,
Yeah.
and instead of nourishing ourselves with what we really need, we're just filling our plates with whatever looks appealing without really thinking about whether it's good for us or not.
That's a great way to put it, and the source warns that this kind of spiritual gluttony can lead to indigestion, so to speak.
Confusion, disillusionment, even harm. So how do we develop that discernment, that ability to tell the difference between what's truly nourishing and what's just empty calories?
Well, the source points to the importance of inner purification, which goes hand in hand with that concept of yin and yang we talked about earlier. It's about transforming those darker, denser aspects of ourselves.
The fears, the ego attachments, the negative patterns.
Yeah, all of that into something lighter and more refined.
So it's not just about adding more spiritual practices or knowledge to our lives, but about doing the deeper work, the shadow work that allows us to see more clearly and make wiser choices.
Exactly. The source uses that image of the muddy water. Again, no matter how elaborate or beautiful the cup is, if the water itself is murky, it's not going to quench our thirst. The real work lies in purifying the water, clearing our inner vision.
And I imagine that purification process isn't always easy or pleasant.
No, you're absolutely right. The source acknowledges that the path of true spiritual growth often involves confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves, facing our fears, and letting go of old patterns that no longer serve us.
It sounds like it takes a lot of courage to really embark on this kind of journey.
It does, and the source emphasizes that courage is an essential quality for anyone seeking authentic spiritual growth. It's not about becoming fearless, but about learning to act in alignment with our values and aspirations, even when it's difficult or scary.
This reminds me of those stories of the biblical prophets who often faced a lot of opposition, even persecution for speaking truth to power. They weren't afraid to challenge the status quo or to call out injustice, even when it put them at risk.
That's a powerful connection, and it speaks to this idea that the pursuit of truth, particularly spiritual truth, can be disruptive. It can challenge our comfort zones, our assumptions, and sometimes even the established order of things.
So it's not just about personal transformation then, but also about potentially contributing to a larger shift in consciousness, a movement towards a more just and compassionate world.
Right, and the source seems to be suggesting that these individual journeys of self-discovery and transformation can actually have a ripple effect, inspiring others to question their own beliefs and to live more authentically.
That's inspiring, but it also makes me wonder about how to navigate this path, especially in a world where there's so much conflicting information and advice out there. Finding authentic guidance seems crucial.
It is, and the source specifically addresses this challenge, pointing out that true spiritual teachers are actually quite rare in this day and age.
It seems like everyone and their dog claims to be a guru or a spiritual guide these days.
Yeah, and the source cautions us to be wary of those who claim to have all the answers or who promise quick and easy solutions. It's about discerning between those who are genuinely walking the path and those who are simply trying to capitalize on the growing interest in spirituality.
So how do we avoid falling prey to these spiritual entrepreneurs, so to speak? The source seems to suggest that intuition plays a key role here.
Yes, trusting that gut feeling, that inner voice that tells us whether something feels right or wrong, true or false. It's about developing that sense of discernment, learning to distinguish between the genuine and the counterfeit.
It's like that saying, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly, but in the spiritual realm, things aren't always so clear-cut. That's why cultivating our intuition, our ability to sense the subtle energy behind words and actions, is so important.
And this brings us back to that analogy you used about finding a spiritual teacher, like finding a good doctor. We wouldn't just choose any doctor off the street. We'd do our research, ask for referrals, and trust our gut feeling about whether we felt comfortable with them or not.
Exactly. The source seems to be suggesting that we should approach our spiritual journey with that same level of care and discernment. It's about taking responsibility for our own well-being, both physically and spiritually.
So it's not just about passively waiting for the perfect guru to appear, but about actively seeking out guidance, asking questions, and trusting our own inner compass.
Right, and the source reminds us that ultimately the most important teacher is within us.
So even if we do find a teacher or a tradition that resonates with us, it's essential to remember that our spiritual journey is ultimately our own. Absolutely. The source seems to be advocating for a balanced approach, honoring the wisdom of traditions like Taoism and Kabbalah, but also recognizing the importance of personal experience and inner guidance.
It's like using a map to guide us through unfamiliar terrain, but also being willing to go off trail and explore the hidden paths that call to us.
That's a great analogy. The source encourages us to be both students and explorers, to learn from the wisdom of the past, but also to forge our own unique paths.
Speaking of forging our own paths, you also highlighted a point about the potential challenges and even opposition that spiritual seekers can face. It's like that old saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down.
Yeah, that's a powerful image, and the source does seem to acknowledge that the pursuit of truth, particularly spiritual truth, can be disruptive. It can challenge our comfort zones, our assumptions, and sometimes even the established order of things. It can bring up resistance both internally and externally.
It's not really surprising that a path that encourages us to question everything, including societal norms and ingrained beliefs, might ruffle some feathers.
You're right. The source seems to be suggesting that true spiritual seekers often find themselves at odds with the prevailing values and beliefs of society. This is because the path of spiritual awakening often requires us to question authority, challenge conventional wisdom, and embrace a way of life that is countercultural.
It's almost like the more we awaken to our true selves, the more we might stand out from the crowd like a bright light in a dim room.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and the source seems to be encouraging us to embrace that light, to let it shine brightly, even if it makes others uncomfortable. It's about having the courage to be ourselves, to live authentically, even if it means going against the grain.
And that courage, I'm guessing, is closely tied to that idea of aligning ourselves with the Tao, with the natural order of the universe.
Exactly. The more we align ourselves with our true nature, the more we tap into a source of strength and resilience that allows us to face challenges with grace and determination.
This brings to mind another fascinating concept from your notes, the idea of a spiritual test, or a trial that seekers often encounter on their path.
Yeah, the source suggests that these challenges aren't punishments, but rather opportunities for growth and transformation. They're like tests that reveal our strengths and weaknesses, pushing us to evolve and become more aligned with our highest potential.
So it's about seeing difficulties not as roadblocks, but as stepping stones on our journey towards greater awareness and understanding.
Precisely. And the source emphasizes that these trials are not random events, but rather part of a larger cosmic plan designed to help us evolve and refine our souls.
This makes me think of the story of Job from the Bible, who faced immense suffering despite being a righteous man. It's a reminder that sometimes we endure hardships not because we've done something wrong, but because these experiences are necessary for our spiritual development.
That's a great connection, and it speaks to the idea that true spiritual growth often involves facing the unknown, embracing uncertainty, and trusting that even in the darkest of times, we're being guided and supported.
Speaking of support, the source also touches on the importance of community and relationships in our spiritual journeys, acknowledging the value of connection, while also cautioning against blindly following any particular group or leader.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between independence and interdependence.
Yeah.
We need the support and guidance of others, but we also need to cultivate our own inner compass and trust our own discernment.
So it's about finding a community that supports our growth and challenges us to evolve, while also maintaining our own sense of autonomy and responsibility for our spiritual journey.
Exactly, and the source reminds us that ultimately the most important relationship is the one we have with ourselves. It's through self-reflection, introspection, and a willingness to face our own shadows that we truly come to know ourselves and connect with our deepest truth.
And that brings us back to that concept of self-cultivation, of purifying our hearts and minds so we can see more clearly and act with greater wisdom and compassion.
Indeed, the source seems to be suggesting that the path of spiritual growth isn't about seeking external validation or achieving some kind of spiritual status, but rather a deep and ongoing process of inner transformation.
It's about becoming the best version of ourselves, not for the sake of others, but for the sake of our own souls.
Precisely. And the source implies that this journey of self-discovery and transformation is not only beneficial for ourselves, but also for the world around us.
Like that Gandhi quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Exactly. The source seems to be suggesting that as we cultivate our own inner peace, compassion, and wisdom, we naturally radiate those qualities outwards, inspiring others to do the same.
This makes me wonder about the role of free will and destiny in our spiritual journeys. Does the source offer any insights on this age-old debate?
Well, the source seems to acknowledge that both forces are at play in our lives. We have the freedom to make choices, but we also operate within a larger cosmic framework that influences our experiences.
So it's not a question of either, but rather a delicate dance between free will and destiny?
Exactly, and the source emphasizes that true spiritual growth involves aligning our will with the divine will, which is ultimately about love, compassion, and the highest good for all beings.
This resonates with the Kabbalistic concept of tikkun olam, which means repairing the world.
That's a great connection. Tikkun olam is a central principle in Kabbalah, suggesting that we have a responsibility to participate in the healing and transformation of the world. It's not just about personal enlightenment, but also about contributing to a more just and compassionate society.
And the source seems to suggest that our individual struggles, those spiritual tests we talked about earlier, can actually be opportunities to participate in this larger process of Tikkun Olam.
Yes, by facing our own challenges with courage and compassion, we develop the qualities and skills needed to help others and make a positive impact on the world.
So our personal growth is intertwined with the collective good. It's not just about retreating into a cave and meditating, but about bringing the fruits of our spiritual practice into the world and making a difference.
Exactly, and the source emphasizes that this is not an easy path, but it is the path of true spiritual fulfillment and lasting happiness.
This brings to mind another concept from your notes, karma. The idea that our actions have consequences, both in this life and beyond. How does the source approach this idea?
Well, the source seems to suggest that by acting in alignment with love and compassion, we create positive karma that benefits both ourselves and others. Conversely, actions driven by selfishness and greed generate negative karma that can lead to suffering.
So it's about recognizing that we are all interconnected and that our choices have a ripple effect that extends far beyond our immediate sphere of influence.
Precisely, and the source emphasizes that true spiritual growth involves taking responsibility for our actions and their consequences, both positive and negative.
This brings us to a fascinating discussion about the nature of good and evil and how to discern between the two in a world that's often morally ambiguous.
Right. The source seems to suggest that true discernment requires more than just following rules or doctrines. It involves cultivating a deep inner knowing, an intuitive sense of what is right and wrong, what is aligned with love and what is not.
So it's about developing a moral compass that's rooted in our hearts rather than just our heads.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that this inner knowing can only be cultivated through a process of self-reflection, honesty, and a willingness to face our own shadow side.
This connects with the Jungian concept of the shadow, those unconscious aspects of our personality that we often repress or deny.
That's a great connection. The source seems to be suggesting that true spiritual growth requires integrating those shadow aspects, bringing them into the light of consciousness so they can be healed and transformed.
So it's about acknowledging our own darkness and imperfections rather than pretending they don't exist.
Precisely. And the source emphasizes that this process of shadow work is essential for developing true compassion both for ourselves and others.
This reminds me of the Buddhist teaching of non-judgment, the idea that we should accept ourselves and others unconditionally, flaws and all.
That's a beautiful connection. Both traditions point towards the idea that true love and compassion arise from a place of deep acceptance and understanding, rather than judgment or condemnation.
So it's about embracing our wholeness, both the light and the shadow, and recognizing that it's in the integration of these polarities that we find true liberation and fulfillment.
Exactly. And the source suggests that this process of integration isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing journey, a lifelong exploration of our own depths and the mysteries of the human heart.
It sounds like the path of spiritual growth is not for the faint of heart. It requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to confront both our inner demons and the challenges of the external world.
You're right, the source doesn't sugarcoat the difficulties, but it also emphasizes the profound rewards that come with this journey, a life of greater meaning, purpose, and connection.
And perhaps it even leads us to a deeper understanding of the ultimate mystery of life itself.
Indeed, and as we continue our own explorations, perhaps we can ponder a question that wasn't explicitly addressed in the source material. How do we balance the pursuit of personal enlightenment with our responsibilities to the world around us? Is it possible to achieve both individual liberation and collective transformation? Something to think about as we continue our journey.
It's a really interesting question to think about. Can we really work towards personal enlightenment while also, contributing to the well-being of others?
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, I think the source material kind of hints at that, especially when talking about right action. In both Taoism and Kabbalah, aligning yourself with that natural order isn't just about personal harmony, but about contributing to a greater balance in the world.
So maybe those acts of service we talked about earlier aren't actually separate from spiritual growth,
Yeah.
but an important part of it.
Exactly. It's like that Taoist principle of wu-wei, effortless action.
Right.
When we're aligned with our true nature, our actions just naturally flow outwards in a way that benefits everyone, ourselves, and the world around us.
It's amazing how these ancient traditions offer such timeless wisdom that still feels so relevant today, with all the challenges we face.
Yeah, and one of the biggest challenges you seem to be grappling with, based on your notes, is this idea of the magical age, all this information, the self-proclaimed experts, the potential for spiritual materialism to distract us from the real inner work.
Yeah, it feels like a constant balancing act, wanting to explore all these different spiritual ideas and practices, but also staying grounded and discerning.
And the source really emphasizes that the most important journey is the one inwards, cultivating that inner compass, that sense of knowing what feels true and aligned for you.
Like you said, for cleaning a muddy cup.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter how beautiful the cup is, if the water itself is impure, it's not going to quench our thirst.
Exactly, that inner purification, that process of refining our thoughts, emotions, and actions, it's really the foundation for authentic spiritual growth. It allows us to see the world more clearly, make better choices, and contribute in a way that aligns with our highest potential.
This whole deep dive has given me so much to think about, especially that idea that true spiritual teachers are rare, and we really need to cultivate our own inner wisdom.
Yeah, the source encourages us to approach spiritual seeking with the same kind of discernment we'd use when choosing a doctor. Do your research, ask questions, trust your intuition.
And in the end, it's about recognizing that we're each responsible for our own spiritual growth, for finding our own unique path.
Absolutely. It's a journey that takes courage, resilience, and a willingness to embrace the unknown, but the rewards are truly immeasurable.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into spirituality and self-cultivation. Thank you so much for guiding us through all these complex ideas.
It was my pleasure, and remember, the path of self-discovery is a lifelong journey. This deep dive has hopefully given you some valuable tools and perspectives to continue your exploration.
Absolutely. And as you continue on your path, maybe consider this. How do the principles of Taoism and Kabbalah, with their emphasis on balance and harmony, apply to the relationships in your life? Food for thought as you navigate the complexities of human connection and spiritual growth.